Good evening, everyone. I'm glad you could make it tonight. I'm here with Sandra Scott with Scott Marketing and Consulting Group. You're familiar with her. We had a discussion, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago about how we can get you guys the best information from Sandra's knowledge, of course, and then we'll give you some other resources during this presentation too, but how we can help you guys prepare for those initial surveys or those inspections, in other words. I know survey is kind of a different word for people who are not in this industry to hear, but it's an inspection from the state or whoever may need to be inspecting your care home. And so you guys need to know what to do to prepare for those and what are some things that maybe Sandra has experienced in her experience of running an assisted living home or being involved with assisted living homes in general, maybe things she's heard of her clients dealing with, and how we can prevent you guys from going through those same things. So if you have questions throughout the presentation, go ahead and type it in the questions tab over on the right-hand side in your control panel. And I'll try and work out if you have any sort of technical difficulties, I'll try and help you during the presentation. Otherwise, Sandra will answer questions at the end of the presentation. So, Sandra, thank you so much for being here. And you know, I always have the best time. Right before this, you guys, we were laughing our butt off because I was telling her all about my dogs and the crazy things my dogs do. And she's like, I didn't know dogs did any of those things. So we always have the best conversations. She's always full of great information about marketing, and I'm full of great information about what dogs do on the side. So it's okay.
Yeah. I love it. Thank you, Molly.
You're welcome.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm so excited to talk to you tonight about survey and preparation, being prepared for your survey. And as Molly said, it's also known as an inspection. And we're going to talk about what that means, what really is a survey, the purpose of it, what to know about deficiencies, and the tips to prepare. And sometimes this can be a bit boring. You know, it can seem a topic like you're in law school and you're reading through all these legalities. And so as Molly mentioned, I'm going to do my very best to season it with some real life examples of what I have experienced. Now, prior to running my own agency, I actually was vice president of sales and marketing for 3 large CCRCs. So I oversaw 3 assisted living communities, 3 memory care communities, 3 skilled nursing facilities. And so we had a lot of inspections. And so I'm going to share with you some of our experiences and the takeaways that I've had. And then since working with a lot of residential assisted living homeowners, you know, their experiences. And so it's been wonderful to be on both sides, to be able to see honestly how consistent, truly consistent the state is. And so it doesn't really matter the size of your community or the number of your communities you have. What's really important and really vital to your success is following the regulations and what the state says. So without further ado, let's get started. We're going to look at what we need to know about deficiencies and talk about tips to prepare. And in that, we're going to discuss what a mock survey is. And before we get started, it's really important to understand how different states define assisted living facilities. So I live in the state of Texas. And so in the state of Texas, we have, prior to being overseen by the Department of Health and Human Services, we were under a department called TDADS, the Texas Department of Aging and Disability Services. And since that transition over the last few years, they have been working really diligently and hard to put together a structure of regulations for assisted living. In that, some of those are adapted from a skilled nursing environment, some are written specifically for an assisted living facility, and some are a combination of it. And so it's really important for assisted living owner-operators, administrators, managers to really know what the regulations say. And so I thought this term was a really good broad one that no matter what state you're in, you will be able to relate. So as it says, assisted living services are driven by a philosophy that emphasizes personal dignity and autonomy to age in place in a residential setting where receiving increasing or decreasing levels of services as the person's needs change. So it's really important to know that that is how assisted living facilities, as the industry term is called, or I like to say communities because it's their home, is defined. So before we begin discussing about it, it's really important to know that that is the definition. And the cornerstone of a lot of these definitions is, or embedded in that, is choice, dignity, and individuality. Those are truly the cornerstones of the services of an assisted living community. And it's vital that you are able to understand how to put these cornerstones into practice daily in your RAL home, in the care and interactions with residents. So for example, if choice, your residents have a right to choose what services they receive and how those services will be delivered. Dignity, services are provided in privacy and residents are not meant to feel bad or belittled when services are needed. Individuality, you get to know the resident as a person and his or her preferences of how services need to be delivered. And why is this important? You know, why did I take the opportunity to read a definition? You're an owner operator, you know what an assisted living community is, and talk about these cornerstones, which are, again, choice, dignity, and individuality. It's because this definition and these cornerstones actually shape how these regulators survey you, how their perception of defining these regulations and these codes and laws when they're walking into your facility. And so it's really important that you pay attention to that when you're training your staff, when you're doing your mock survey, in your day-to-day operations, because although your team, your care team is wonderful, you can unintentionally give someone or revoke their right to choice. You could revoke their right to dignity. You can impede upon their individuality. And it's very commonplace sometimes to do. So for example, if you have a memory care community, you think, or your care team member may think, you know, they don't know the difference between this shirt and this shirt, so I'm gonna pick for them. That's not giving them their individuality, and it's not honoring them in a dignified manner. They're still able to choose. And so these are ways that if your care team is observed, that actually can be found against you. So it's really important that you know what your community definition of, or your state's definition of assisted living facility is, or community, and know what the cornerstones are, what the bedrocks are of that, so that you can embed that in your training. Before we get into a state survey, I wanted to share something with you. So in my hand, and I hope you can see it, so I've got to look at the different camera. These are my Bibles, right? This is my holy grail of information. It's really important to me that every time my credentials are about to expire, I actually go and become certified with the state. Because as a marketing consultant, it's really important for me to know what are my state's regulatory qualifications and requirements for marketing, but it gives me a wealth of knowledge as well to other aspects of regulations that I understand and can pass on to my client partners. So for example, as I mentioned, TDADS is no longer the one that's over the state of Texas, and the Department of Health and Human Services is. So all of these regulations changed. And so as a result, and I also took the administrator's training course, as a result, some of the regulations have changed. And I have a client partner who is building a brand new community from scratch. And over the year, working with the surveyor, working with architects, working with builders, everyone, all these plans were in place. The city was approving everything. I come back from this training, and because I have the sketches, I have the plans that the architects have, and we're looking at all of this. He's involved me a lot because we're looking at a myriad of things in terms of marketing capabilities and a way to add value so that family members and residents can benefit. And so I mentioned to him the regulations on requiring a certain amount of space in the room has changed in the state of Texas. State of Texas is requiring a larger amount of space for residents. And so it's not just because of the fact that you can age in place and you may be able-bodied and walk. Can this space accommodate a wheelchair, for example? Can this space now accommodate someone who is bariatric? And so he went and looked at everything again, and lo and behold, it did not meet those regulations. So the opportunity existed to fix it easily on paper and then resubmit to get approved, or had the space been built, he would never have passed inspection, and it would have been $1 million fix. And so it's really, really important to know what these regulations are, how important it is to stay up to date and current, and to, if you have something like this, to refer to it all of the time, because it will save you not just in deficiencies, but if you're building something new or renovating, it will be your guide. And as I said, it's my Bible. I've highlighted so many sections in here and refer to the regulations, everything about marketing. I know like the back of my hand, but I also know square footage and of a room and fire safety and things like that. And so it's really, really vital. And I think key, if you can develop your own, if you don't have one, your state should be able to have a lot of regulations that you can just download, and then you can create your own. So that being said, let's go into what a state survey is. All licensed assisted living facilities living in a residential care home are required to follow state regulations for licensure. We know that. A state survey is an unannounced inspection which confirms whether or not your RAL home is compliant with regulations as set and required by your state for quality of care. Although regulated at the state level, there are some federal regulations that you must understand and must ensure compliance with as well. And for up-to-date information on survey requirements, it's important to contact your Department of Health or governing agency. Now, just a quick few comments here. Now, all of our regulations are different and somewhat similar because of consistency across states in elder care. But it's really important to know the federal regulations that you're still being held accountable to. Things, regulations that the Department of Labor dictate, FMLA, ADA, HIPAA, fair housing, all of those, yes, are national, and yet you're still held accountable to it. So you've got your state regulatory requirements, and then you've got some federal regulatory requirements, both of which you are supposed to follow. And so when your surveyor comes in unannounced, they're going to be looking at both. And that's why when they're reviewing the files and they're sitting in that room offsite and looking at everything, it's important to make sure you've ticked all the boxes. And that's where, and we'll talk about it a little bit, a mock survey comes in. Now, I just want to say one more thing before we get on to the next slide. An unannounced inspection is truly that. It can happen anytime. I remember my director of training, my vice president of training would say, okay, it's actually a year to the date and we're going to get inspected this month. And then 6 months later is when we would be inspected. So it just happens. And sometimes we've literally had state walk in at the end of the day during shift change just to see. We've had it as soon as shift change happened in the morning, in the middle of the day. The only time we've never had an inspection, or I've never experienced an inspection, is in the middle of the night. State surveyors I've never seen or experienced come in the middle of the night, but they can come at any time of day, and it's always unannounced. And the reason why this webinar is so important is I just want you to get comfortable not being afraid. Oh my gosh, it can be an intimidating process, not just for you, because so much is riding on the line, not just financially, but your reputation. And that's why having 0 deficiencies and having a really great survey is so important to your legacy and to your ability as a home to continue to take residents. But it also is so important for your care team. Your care team is probably just really nervous about a surveyor when they come in. And, you know, I've seen nurses who are brilliant and strong and confident and capable in everything they're doing just become just unable to speak or shake because they know how important it is that the surveyor is there. So we want your staff to be incredibly comfortable with a surveyor coming in, knowing that they're not their enemy, and I think I say this in the next slide, I'm not sure, they're not their enemy, and it's really important to feel relaxed and comfortable knowing that it's just a normal part of operations. It's a part of doing business. It's a part of having your RAL home. It's just something that's so important, and when you have that mind shift, knowing that it's important to resident care. They're just making sure that that quality care is there. And because we're partners in this together to ensure that that senior resident is getting the best care possible, then your team members are going to feel more comfortable knowing that when that surveyor comes unannounced, they're going to be just fine because he or she knows you've got an amazing RAL home and you're consistent and always doing what you're supposed to do to honor that resident and provide quality care following those regulations. So with that said, let's go into a deficiency. So we've defined what the state says a AL community is, what a survey is. Now let's look at a deficiency. It's defined as a regulatory requirement a facility does not meet or fails to meet during a state survey or inspection. So for each deficiency, the state surveyor determines the level of harm to the resident or residents involved in the scope of the problem. And the state surveyor then assigns a scope and severity value to the deficiency. Now, why is this so important? This is everything. If the deficiency is found to just be isolated to that one incident or to that one individual, that scope and severity may be a lot smaller. However, if it impacts the entire floor or the entire room or the entire wing or the entire community, then that scope and severity is going to be much larger. So a case in point, with my experience, we had surveyors announce or come in, and as I worked for a very large community, everyone was on alert. Everyone had a corporate phone, and then we texted state surveys in-house because we wanted everyone to know and be aware that the surveyors were there. Now, that's all we can do. That's the only forewarning we had. They walk in the door, you greet them warmly, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But you do your very best to be ready. And if you're survey ready every day, there is nothing you have to worry about because you've done your very best. But even when you've done your very best, things happen. So there's one year when the surveyors were there, and it just so happened they tested the water. And the maintenance worker for this facility had changed a valve. And unfortunately, it was a temporary situation in which he was going to replace this valve, but whatever was done did not regulate that water temperature. As a result, the water that came out of this resident's room in the sink in the room was scalding hot, so hot that it would give a 3rd-degree burn. That was deemed an IJ, an immediate jeopardy, and our facility was fined $20,000 a day until we came up with a plan of correction. So did you know that that very day, our director of nursing, our director of maintenance, everybody was working till very late at night on that plan of correction. The moment the state surveyors walked in the very next morning, we had that plan of correction. We were still fined that day, but we had that plan of correction. That plan of correction was reviewed. It took a few days to be reviewed. And so we were fined quite a bit. By the end of that fine, it was anywhere between $80,000 and $100,000. So it was a lot of money to spend for that fine, but they found it to be where our residents, multiple residents, could be harmed because of that water temperature. And so again, every other week before, had they checked that water, it would have been fine. And so it just goes to show that things like that happen. You can be as prepared as you can be, and it was unfortunate. And the thing about an IJ, what's really important to remember is, at least in the state of Texas, those stay with you for years, for 3 years. So with each passing year, you can, the higher your score is, the better survey you had that year, then it decreases the impact of the prior year's IJ, and then until you're back to a level set. But it takes 4 years. So it's even after that fine is paid, even after that POC is made and submitted and approved, that still happens. Another incident in which we had a deficiency had to do with life safety. And we had to submit a plan of correction, and the state allowed us to come up with a thought that was so out of the box. And because the POC had nothing to actually do with the deficiency, it actually had to do with improving infection control and those measures. And so the state allowed us to apply the monies that we would have had in that fine after the initial payment to this new protocol and this new machinery, this equipment that was actually going to reduce the amount of cross-contamination and clean. It was, I don't want to mention the product on this webinar, but it was phenomenal. And let's just say hospitals across the world actually use it. And it's a really great thing to have during the pandemic right now. But there are things that you can do when you have your plan of correction to the state for consideration. So I am proof that there isn't a deficiency that I haven't seen. Some have shocked me, like the water temperature, and some have just been unfortunate, but it happens because people get nervous. We've had deficiencies for pericare because the nurse was just so nervous that someone is standing over her. Not the 4th time, not the 15th time, but the 45th time to perform the same procedure. Some nurses are nervous because it's the 10th time that this inspector during the observation period has watched her wash her hands. And it wasn't on the 1st, it wasn't on the 9th, but it was that 10th time that she may not have taken off the gloves the right way or washed her hands the right way. And so that's very nerve-wracking. And so that's why everything we're going to talk about is so important. But that shows you, and the reason why I'm taking time to talk about deficiencies is because it can happen. It can happen easily, and it just isn't that it's the surveyor's first time observing it. When they're observing in your community for days. And so just know that the more you practice this, the more you help educate your team, the more comfortable and relaxed they're going to be, because they know that what they're doing is following protocol, following regulations, and doing it the right way. And if you practice this every single day, and then your ops team, meaning you as an owner operator, whoever's on your maintenance team, all of these other key crucial people who come together to make your team are doing their part, then you've done the best you can. Now, now that we've examined all of that, let's take a look at what the common deficiencies are. Now, these are just some of the common deficiencies that I have put together from, honestly, my experience. And so we'll go through a few of these now. As the state survey occurs unannounced over the period of a few days, during this time, the state surveyor examined many areas to determine regulatory compliance. Common deficiencies are found in these areas. So it could be activities. And you could say, well, how can an activity actually result in a deficiency? It can happen if your activity isn't part of the care plan. And so it's really important that you don't overlook any aspect of what you've put together for that resident, and making sure that all of the regulations and what the regulations stipulate should happen is happening, and every part of that file in terms of documentation is there. So we'll just go through the list, and I'll highlight a few of the areas in which, from my experience, of course, you can understand how this can become a deficiency. Dignity. I mentioned pericare before. In the beginning of our webinar, I talked about not offering choice, shaming, and it's you know, unintentional, sorry, but people feel like they were shamed. You know, you're not honoring that person holistically. During the observation period is something that you can become deficient for. Skin conditions, pressure ulcers, wounds are huge. When they know that a resident, when they're looking at the care plan and they see you're doing a wound care, they may actually observe the whole debridement and seeing is that protocol, is that process being followed? How long has this resident had that wound? That is really important. Infection control. We have never been in a time in our generation in which we've seen this be more important. Infection control has always been paramount in a skilled nursing facility. It's what we live in and breathe by. However, in a pandemic, it's everyone's burden. It's everyone has to be knowledge. No one can be unaware of cross-contamination and infection control. So well before the pandemic, our state regulator said infection control is important. And so even now, at the beginning of the pandemic, about 3 or 4 months in, CMS actually put out this news release and they let everyone know we are not going lightly. When our surveyors come, and our surveyors will come during this pandemic, we are going to look at your infection control. And so oftentimes I find it incredibly helpful. I read a lot of CMS news briefs, and I actually will give our client partners a heads up. Although this is at a federal level and you are private pay, so your Medicare, Medicaid dollars are not coming in, this may not apply to you per se, but it does. Because whenever there's that federal oversight, the state will look at it and it will somehow influence or in some way be incorporated. So you really have to be mindful. So even though there are specific regulations that the state has says governed, there might be new regulations being written that you're not aware of. So it's really important to know these areas and how you can really stay above reproach. Medication management, administration, storage, and errors, that is huge. So it is not easy. As you know, once you have done your assessment, everything, all your ducks in a row, and a resident comes in, any senior who is over a certain age, they're, you know, they have polymeds, and medicine reconciliation is huge. It's important, it's vital. And so that is a number one area the state is going to go to see if you are following regulations. You know, are you administering it properly per your licensure? Are you storing it properly? Is it locked? You know, are you documenting it? Are there med areas? And I will tell you, whatever system that you're using, similar to what we talked about, you know, there's a CRM, there is Point Click Care is a program or an application I talked about last time. They've got a medication management system, but your director of nursing or your nurses, or if there is anyone providing nursing oversight, it's really important that you get with that individual and ask the state, you know, for advice. The state is not your enemy. Regulations are a guideline, you know, that help us stay within compliance measures so that we can provide really great care. Without it, we would be hurting people, and that person could be a loved one, and everyone in our care should be treated as if they were family, as if they are our loved one. And so I look at all of this very welcoming and say, how can I apply? How can I make this happen? How can I do my very best and teach my entire team to know this like the back of their hand, so that they do it second nature, and they do it with ease, and they do it comfortably, and they're always going to stay in compliance. So medication management is huge. Documentation, I cannot tell you the number of tags we've had and I've seen happen because of documentation. And everyone's busy and everyone is harried. You know, shift change can happen. The number one story I can tell you, and it's I know it's hard to believe, but we had a hurricane warning, and the hurricane came close enough and we lost power. And so what do? We have, this is for our SNF, we had patients who are on vents, we had the backup generator working, but our entire EMR system went out. So if you have an EMR EHR system, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't paper or chart, what are you going to do? So literally in the moment, we had to we had a gun temp taking temps, because even though we have lost power, the government is not going to say, you know, care home X, we understand you lost power. We're not going to hold you accountable. And I'm being very facetious, but they're not going to do that. They're going to say, irregardless of all circumstances, did you abide by these regulations to uphold the standard of care for your residents so that they receive the best care possible? And even in that situation, we had designated people on our team who were gunning the air for temps. We were documenting the temps. We then had to come up with a backup plan. And I kid you not, we were down in Kinko's getting everything printed so that we can hand chart for the rest of the night. There were so many things in play, so many actions, and we were looking at what other, because you have a plan in the case of an emergency, natural disaster or others. You should have communities, nearby facilities that you have relationships with, prearranged in the event of emergency. Can your patient, loved one, resident, whomever go there? And so we were contacting them and documenting how many residents and who, depending upon their diagnosis and their acuity and any comorbidities, would be appropriate for that level of care. So I hope that I'm not overwhelming you, but I'm just sharing my experiences. Having been, even though I was in the marketing realm, I'm still part of the team. I'm still part of the care team. And so it's really important for me to know what's going on in our communities. And so I was fortunate, I look at it as to be able to know and to be aware, to train and be a part of what our POCs were and what we were doing to remedy it, because I owned it. And that's another thing before I go on. It's really important for you to own it. If you have a deficiency and if that unfortunate event happens, do not deny it, do not lie. You can say to that family member, yes, unfortunately, because it's public knowledge, it's public information, this happened. Here is the plan of correction we submitted to the state. Thank them for bringing it to your attention, of course. The state approved our plan of correction, and here's how we've worked on it. And I'm happy to say we've had several mock surveys, and as a result, we don't have any more. Or our last survey proved that that very area is not an issue. We were found to be compliant. So the more transparent, honest, open, and communicative you are, families know that they can entrust their relative with you. Things happen. And again, this is all to prepare in case that does happen. But if deficiencies happen, you can, again, move on. But these are really important to know when you're going through your mock survey and you're making your plans and you're training your team, that these are areas that the state is really going to look in, no matter what state you're a part of. So even though the state of Nevada may have different regulations to a degree from the state of Florida, from the state of Texas, from California, they're still all going to be looking at this holistically. Physical restraints. Physical restraints, isn't just tying someone down, which unfortunately in subpar facilities around our country, that still may happen, but it can also be underneath psychoactive medication. Of course, MDS came out with new regulations about 3 or 4 years ago, stating that that was considered a physical restraint. So yes, a medication can be considered a physical restraint. So again, how do you know that? You have to know your regulations. And so unbeknownst to you, that ignorance can cause a deficiency. And that is going to be very difficult to have to try and explain. So knowledge is power. How you manage pain, diabetic insulin management, if your facility community takes sliding scale, that's all really important. It's important to document, and it's important to be part of the care plan. I have infection control there twice. I'm sorry. That's how important it is that we have it there twice. Life safety, we're actually during the mock survey review, I was going to go over life safety and what that really means. Social services is paramount to ensure that your residents are receiving that. The environment, what that's going to be during their observation, dining, dignity, all of that, the 3 meals a day, treatment observation, and quality assessment and assurance. Now, quality assurance is defined as a program for the systematic monitoring and evaluation of the various aspects of a project, service, facility to ensure that standards of quality are being met. And again, just to emphasize, you're not the enemy and no one is going in to attack you or to find a myriad of things wrong with you. And I say that with confidence because I have sat through 3 days of training for 8 to 10 hours a day. I have been certified, and these trainers who have worked for the state, have been surveyors, who write regulations, I became so in awe of them and so just have such high regard and respect because they helped me to think differently. How unintentional, with good intentions, we may think we're doing the right thing, but how an unintentional thing can happen that can cause harm to a resident or infringe upon their rights, thus causing a deficiency. And so it's not an easy job being a surveyor. So if we were to put ourselves in their shoes, when they've got all of this to look at, you can understand why they're being critical to ensure that your community is compliant, because the health and safety and security of that resident is on them. If something were to happen to that resident that they did not take note of after they left, that's on them, and not just for their job, but as a conscience. And every surveyor I've met behind that title is a human being with a family who cares, and they really do love seniors, and that's why they're there. So I just want to encourage you that they're looking at quality measures being met. So a strong QA program is great to have. If you don't know how to put one together, there are many, many resources online, but go to your state. They can guide you also about a really great QA program. It's a state's regulatory requirement and serves as a means to identify potential compliance issues. So when you audit your QA program, look at all of these possible deficiencies and say, what can we do to improve? Now, QA program is very vast. I mean, we can do an entire webinar just to QA program and developing the right QA program and the right quality assessment and assurance program for you. But every community you have to develop one for each community that you oversee and own. And it's really important that you have a standard operating procedure that all of your team members are going to follow and know, and your QA program is one of them. So all that being said, we're going to look at a mock survey because it's so important now that you know what a survey is, that a surveyor is not our enemy. They love seniors. They want to make sure that they're in the right care. And hey, they're there to say, you're a gold star. And many of us don't think that way. We think that they're out to get us. And I will tell you the reason why I'm saying that is because out of hundreds of employees that I worked with, associates, hardly any of them liked a surveyor, and they all got nervous and or thought that they were out to get them. They're not, because we only like surveyors when they have no deficiencies, we have no tags, and we're still 4-star. Then we love them. The moment they find a deficiency, that surveyor was in a bad mood and they were just looking for everything. They're doing their job. And if they weren't doing their job, our residents wouldn't be protected. But when they're doing their job and we've done our job and our part, then we're going to get the star rating and the quality measures and all the accolades and whatnot that we should obviously boast about when we're on the phone with family members, when we're touring them through our communities, on our marketing collateral. Just shine like the new day sun, that this is something that your team works hard every single day, 24/7 to achieve. And that is abiding by the regulations so that we have quality care. And when I talk to a lot of our client partners, when you're reaching out to referral services, I say what they're looking for. You can talk all day about your services and amenities. What they're looking for are your quality metrics. Talk to me about your quality metrics. And there's a number of things that they look for that you can just speak to them about, and automatically you're on their radar, top of mind. You're going to start getting all the referrals because you can back up your quality metrics. So how can we get your community, your home, your RAL, perfect, amazing RAL home that is so much better than that big box? How can we get you survey ready? The way to do that is by conducting what's called a mock survey. So a mock survey is unannounced, addressing all the state regulatory compliances of your RAL home, but conducted by a trained staff member. Your community will follow the same standards of reviewing your regulations and your protocols that you're held accountable to by your state departments of health or governing body. So it's really important that whomever is on your care team know that this is to be taken quite seriously. A mock survey is supposed to enable you to realize what areas of improvements there are, what possible deficiencies exist, putting an immediate plan of correction in place so that your RAL home can be deficient free. And again, the end result is you're providing quality care to your residents. The star of it all, the icing on the cake, is that you're deficient free, and you can just, shout that out to the world because you deserve to. But again, it provides great quality care. And if you think about that, it's really going to be what helps to guide you during this mock survey. So as an owner operator, you know your team. You know who you can select to be on that team. I would never pick just one person. It's usually 2 or 3 people because it's never just one surveyor walking your door. Surveyors are usually RNs, someone who has credentials to look at these many different areas. So if you work with a partnering agency, for example, that provides nursing oversight, you can approach them and say, could we work with you to inspect us, to have a mock survey if you don't have the team in-house. If you are blessed enough to have an RN on your team, then I would choose that RN and perhaps someone in maintenance or someone in operations that has that critical eye that would know that the means of egress is obstructed, and that's an obvious deficiency just like that. You know, oh, we don't have the permits posted, deficiency just like that. Just, you know who on your team can do it. And if you don't have anyone on your team, you're welcome to call me. I'm happy to walk through your staffing with you to pick the best team members and what kind of training you should put together and what resources are out there for you so that you can create the mock survey. But the year just started and it's not too late. So literally you can create a mock survey next week. And conduct this, which will help put you off on a really good foot this year, because again, you know that state is going to come. So what do you need to know for a mock survey? Expect what you inspect. I remember my very first supervisor telling me that, and I've never forgot that. And so you have to be knowledgeable in order to guide your team. So you have to think about a mock survey as inspecting what the expectations are that have been set by your state. So what to expect on the day your community is surveyed. The state laws and rules. So you need to know what they are. What are the regulations? So I'm going to just hold this up. That's the administrator's handbook. No, that's the administrator. So here I have, this is, as I mentioned, my holy grail, right? And so in here are all of the regulations. And so I am partial to everything concerning dignity, respect. I told you I highlight everything. It's really important that your mock surveyors, people on your team, have this in hand. First of all, they should very much familiarize themselves with it, know what the regulation is and what it means, because this is a lot of legalese, for lack of a better word. Sometimes it's hard to understand or interpret if you're not familiar with it. And so bringing your core team, picking 6, 7 people on your team that are going to be trained, and you take a weekend where you have this training and you teach them, or you send these team members to a class where they can be trained and certified. That is going to help you so very much. But you need to know what the regulations are going into your mock survey. It's not just, is everything clean? Is the right food handling temp? Is there a right temperature for the water? Is there a right temperature for the fridge? Is your license up? It's a lot more than that. So know what those regulations are. Know what the surveyor trainings and protocols are. What are their expectations? What have they discovered about your RAL home prior? Now there's something called pre-discovery. So they will, and it's normal, they'll know that your community is an 8-bed community. They'll know that you're 10 beds. They'll know of those 10 beds, actually 8 of them are single and 1 room is a share with. So you have double occupancy. They would have done their homework on you. So they would know what you are licensed for and what governs you. So for example, in the state of Texas, there's type A, there's type B. So if you're type A, that means that residents can and should be able to get up, freely in the case of a fire and an emergency. Type B means that they can't, they need assistance. So when they look at your plan, your plans and your different requirements, they're going to look at how you're going to get everyone out safely in the event of an emergency if there's a fire, because unfortunately they're in harm's way because they physically cannot get out themselves. So all of these things are what the state surveyors in their pre-discovery will do about your community, and they don't just come in thinking, oh wow, I've never been here before. They know. And so you have to think like the surveyor. what are their expectations, what's discoverable, and then review surveyor materials and protocols. The state is really open. The state wants you to succeed. They will say, here is everything you need to do. Here is everything we're going to check. And here are the tools that we can give you. There are a number of states. I actually have one in the resource guide, that Leading Age National from Virginia, I believe. They actually put together a huge mock survey that you're welcome to actually follow. There's so many resources out there, but your state, many states will give that to you as well. Familiarize yourself with how the surveyors document their findings. They're trained in the state. Each state trains their surveyors, so you should know how their findings are documented. Now, once you have appointed a few trained, highly skilled team members to conduct the mock survey, unannounced, it has to be in secret. It's like when we would have an elopement drill for our memory care communities. It was always an unannounced, and we had to find that missing resident within a certain amount of time. And we knew whether or not we would be able to have someone survive under our care. So it is that important. So do it unannounced. So conduct mock surveys regularly, and it depends on your bandwidth. We would conduct mock surveys once a quarter with our QA nurse always on top of it every day. But you're a RAL home, you may not have the staff and payroll to have a QA nurse alone in that role. So you determine how frequently you can conduct a mock survey, but you should do them regularly. Keeping in mind, again, what I mentioned, surveyors are not your enemy. They're conducting surveys to ensure your RAL home is compliant with regulations to ensure quality resident care. Please make sure that they pay attention to how your mock surveyors are treated. So they're going to come back and they're going to give you feedback. Again, because of our own fears or insecurities, we may think that they're our enemy. We have to make sure that our team members are greeting the surveyors as an extension of you, of your business reputation, and that is kindly, courteously, respectful, and welcoming. Are they placed in another room if one is available, or an area to review requested materials and information? Surveyors will review policies and procedures, so make sure to request these documents as a mock surveyor to ensure that operational processes match your policies and procedures. And that's really important because as I have written here, what have you noticed? So if they ask for your policies and procedures on certain areas, and then they observe, it's the period of observation, they're going to see, are there gaps in your processes? Is your care team not following proper procedures? What plan of correction from your observations can you put into place to correct and comply? For example, training. That might mean you realize so many deficiencies in this one area, or that could have been an IJ. You put into place immediate training. And it's really possible to come up with a training program that week because the state gives you so many tools. The mock survey, I would encourage your entire team to practice answering surveyor questions. Answer the questions that are asked directly. Offer the facts or the information requested, and be honest. Always tell the truth. It's so important that your team knows. Again, nervousness causes some people to say things and they don't realize what they're saying, but just be honest, tell the truth, and follow your procedures and protocols. If your staff does not know the answer, it's okay. It's okay to tell them that I just don't know, but it's important to know, did they let you know that they did not know the answer, that they would find out, and then they followed up? So that happens often. You might have a care team member that may not know and can tell the state, I don't know, but I promise to find out. And then that same person has to go back to the surveyor and let them know, because they will note that. Did your staff affirm that policies and procedures are followed using the words "our policy is" or "we always," to demonstrate consistency and compliance? And you will be surprised at what a difference that makes. The "I don't knows" or "I guess so's" or that won't cut it. It won't make a surveyor feel confident. So please, in your training, note that and make sure that your staff feels very comfortable, because yeah, we're the best RAL home out there in our area, and we always do this, and we will always say this, and our policy is always to do this. So that said, they need to know what your policies and procedures are. practice requesting information that a state surveyor would ask for and review. So is it current? Is the information accurate? What do you notice needs improvement or additional training? Were you given exactly what you asked for or additional information? Is information missing, or was additional information not asked for provided? So that's a whole area in and of itself, and it's important to note that, because if information is missing, then they're going to ask for more files to see if that information is there. If you're giving them more information than they're asking for, then it's free for inspection. So just know to give them what they're asking for and make sure it's accurate and up to date. Take copious notes during your observation periods and material review, because that's going to be your saving grace on a POC or what training your team needs. Identify where your community could receive deficiency and where you need a POC. If you identify any issues, put a plan in place immediately to remedy it and follow up to ensure the plan of correction is being followed. And that is important. As an owner operator, it's vital that you follow up. So we want to end with the last areas of a mock survey: conducting an audit of medical records, reviewing your employee files, walking around the community, focusing on environment, dietary, dining, and life safety. So for your medical record audit, ensure that the initial assessments are completed. That's why those assessments are so important. You cannot shortchange that. Service agreements are completed and updated. Care plans are updated. Accurate medicine and treatment orders and supervision are in the file. For employee reviews, make sure your background checks are complete. Orientation and mandatory trainings are complete, and of course the annual training on infection control. That is a non-issue. If you are working for any post-acute community or facility, infection control is what required. It's the law, so that has to be up to date. Oh, I apologize, I went to resources. The walk-arounds. This is where the surveyors are going to do their observation. So it's important to note that state surveyors observe resident care processes, as I mentioned before. And this is where your staff can get nervous, and it's okay, but they don't have to be. The more you practice this and observing, the more they get used to it. It's kind of like being in med school and having, you know, your professor or your doctor or your resident over your shoulder looking at something. So they consider standards of safe storage and So it's important to note that they observe resident care processes, interaction and environment. So they consider standards for safe storage and preparation for food, to protecting residents from physical or mental abuse or inadequate care practices. For the environmental walkthrough and walkarounds, they ensure that the hallways and common areas are free of clutter and well lighted. The outside grounds are well maintained, and that there's proper signage, including maps, licenses, permits posted. For dietary and dining, ensure that your community is meeting sanitation requirements, water temp, fridge temp. Offer 3 meals a day with different menus. Laundry services, make sure that the laundry area is clean and free of debris and clutter, and that the clean and dirty laundry is separated. Life safety, ensure that the fire drills are documented, smoke alarms work, ensure that hazardous materials and anything combustible is stored properly. And note that it's, although this is not a comprehensive list, it will help you to know what to look for during your mock survey. I would encourage you to consult your state's regulation and develop a more thorough list than what we have here that you can work through. And remember that this mock survey should be taken as seriously as your actual state survey and given the same degree of attention and consideration if you plan to be deficiency free. The state looks for many aspects of quality, and so should you. So our last slide is resources. Now, these are just a number of resources that I found regarding state regulations, AHCA, provider resources, again, the leading age, the Minnesota one I talked about, and then there's the compliance store. The compliance store is really, it's membership based, but is the only resource out there outside of going directly to your Department of State of Health and Human Services, or your regulatory governing body, that has up-to-date information on all of the changing regulations, and it is ever changing. For example, a RAL homeowner operator is our client partner, and in his last inspection, a sink that he's had for years is no longer appropriate. He had to get a commercial sink. I mean, regulations change, and he's like, I've had this, you know, for years, and it's been approved the last few surveys, but they're like, things change. He had to upgrade so many different things because the regulations changed that were fire safety. So it was life safety. The fire panel, that was life safety. There was just a lot. And so you want to make sure that you stay compliant and then show that you're meeting all of the expectations. So here's just a few resources. So if you can make sure that the State Department of Health and Human Services becomes your friend, that should be saved in your browser and you're looking at it. But because you wear 20 hats, the compliance store is a really great opportunity for you to have an expert in that field in terms of laws, regulations, what you should do. They, I believe, also offer mock surveys, but these are really good resources. And Molly, when she comes back on, will share with you a resource that RAL Academy, or RAL will be, the association will be able to offer you next week as well. So I know I've rushed through it a little bit and I'm at time, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them for you.
Yeah, we've had a couple flow in, and of course, you guys, these resources that you see on the page right here, I will send them out in an email tomorrow, so don't worry about rushing to write them down. I will send all of these links to you directly. So with the recording and everything tomorrow, if you want them right away, go ahead and send me an email. I can shoot them over to you beforehand, but otherwise you'll get them tomorrow. So let's go into questions here. So when you're talking about having your team trained and be certified, and I tried to clarify this behind the scenes because I assumed what you meant, but I realized I probably should have asked you first. So when you're talking about your team being certified, are you talking about your team being certified in mock surveys or in what the deficiencies will be so that they can do the mock surveys?
Really great question, and I apologize for any confusion. So what I was meaning by certified by your state. So there are classes that your state offers in like a certified assisted living manager. So I'm COM certified. There are administrator trainings. So you can identify, and this could honestly be part of your growth plan for employees and your growth and retention for employees to keep really great talent and to make sure that they grow with you in your legacy. But that's what I meant. It's the certified in these areas of classes and certifications that the state offers. You can't be certified in a mock survey. I wish that was a thing, but you can be really good at conducting a mock survey. I knew the best, my director of nursing, who has more credentials at the end of her name than anyone I've ever met in my life, could not be certified in a mock survey because it's just, again, it's not a thing. It's a service. It's an area of practical application to review regulatory compliance for your community. But the certification is actually in areas that the state offers in regards to your assisted living community that your team members can participate in, that helps to understand regulations and how your community should be running.
Perfect. So Samantha, that answers the question way better than the way I answered the question. I was like, yes, yes, they need to be certified in mock surveys. That too, Samantha. So
I love it.
Yeah, you guys, this has been great. So also what I was just going to mention, yeah, what Sandra mentioned about the compliance store. So what I'm working on with you guys is the compliance store has like almost like a membership type program to be a part of them and have access to the things that they offer. And so through the association, as you being a member with us, I'm going to work on partnering with them in some way so that we can either provide you with discounts or provide you with extra resources through them. Hopefully we do another webinar with them involved in some way. But you can thank Sandra for bringing them on board to just bring them to us as a resource in general, because these are going to be things that, like she said before, this is going to be where you find your Bible that you go back to and you look for all the time. Every time you need to train somebody, every time you need somebody to look up what they should be trained in, if they didn't remember something, these are going to be the places where you find those resources at all of these pages right here. I don't have any other questions coming in, but I do want to remind you guys that Sandra is an extremely valuable resource in way more than just survey preparation. When we're talking about home tours, when we're talking about how to present yourself on social media, on your websites, on anything to do with running your residential assisted living home, really. So reach out to her. I will put her contact information on the email tomorrow. And then you'll also have her website right here, scottgroup.consulting. And then that easy phone number right there, 1-877-CAL-SMCG. And you guys can set up a consulting appointment with her. She usually says they're about 30 minutes. She'll do a consult with you, but I'm sure they last longer than that because Sandra is like me and she likes to talk. So it's all good. It's amazing. It's all good stuff.
We like to help, Molly. We like to help.
You're right. It's not just talking, right? It's being helpful. I was trying to help you with understanding what you're going to experience with your dog when you get it, and you're always trying to help us.
That's right. It's kind of scary, but yay.
So thank you guys for being here with us. Thank you, Sandra. You're always amazing and full of information. So I will see you at the next one.
Thank you all. Good night.